storyteller is a cross-cultural communication strategist, which means that she helps people to break down barriers in culture and communication. And we're delighted to have her tonight. So since she is our first, let's give her a huge round of applause to Dottie Li.
Thank you, Amy. Good evening. My name is Dottie Li. I was born and raised in China, as you might suspect, in a small town of 5 million people. That's small in China. My city is Hefei, sounds just like the bike. It's an inland city with tree-lined streets and low Soviet-style buildings. I grew up in a journalistic family. My father was a newspaperman, and we lived with many of his colleagues in the same compound that belonged to the newspaper, a government's mouthpiece. We were assigned a 2-bedroom apartment with cement floor, and that was considered luxury because of my father's work. In the 1970s, I was a young girl. I would listen to Voice of America's Mandarin broadcast with my family, in secrecy, of course. We were afraid our neighbors would hear us and report us to the authorities. And because we were thirsty for real news. You see, fake news didn't just start 8 months ago. We listened to so many different kinds of programming, and we would huddle in front of the radio on our dining room table. It was the kind of radio that had a wood frame, rectangle with short legs, and dials and a plastic screen that showed the needles, and with the fabric covering the speakers. As a kid, I always thought the radio people were little men living inside the radio, and they would walk out someday. They never did. It became a family ritual. We would listen day and night, in the morning as we were getting ready for school, during and before dinner. As I listened, a new world was opening up to me. A world was so far away, yet so interesting and magnetic. I heard American news, Chinese news, world news, entertainment, sports, politics, things that I couldn't get from China. I decided then I wanted to become a VOA broadcaster. How do I do that? I was this big, 9 years old to be precise. America was thousands of miles away. And China and America were not in good terms then. As a matter of fact, we were taught America was the imperialist, the enemy. But that did not deter me. I knew I had 2 things to do: learning English and going to America. I listened to the broadcast like my life was depending on it. Oftentimes, I would have trouble finding the location as the Chinese government would jam or block the radio signal. And some days, I could barely hear the radio broadcast because the signal was so weak and shaky. And some other days, the signal would disappear in the middle of a program. Over the years, I had my favorite broadcasters, and some I could critique their delivery or pronunciation, as their Mandarin seemed to have an overseas flavor. And I mimicked their style. I fantasized broadcasting with them one day. Starting in middle school, they taught me English, British English, but I wanted to mimic the Voice of America's English program, the American English. As I entered high school, I made a decision to speak Mandarin instead of the local dialect as perfectly as I could, and I looked up words in the dictionary to make sure my pronunciations were perfect. And I was always chosen to be the announcer in my school's sports events and other school activities. I recited poems because of my good Mandarin. When I took the college entrance exam in 1984, my English scored the highest in my entire province of more than 200,000 candidates. I majored in journalism in college and applied for a few American universities. My plan at the time was to go to America for graduate school right after graduation, college. Oh well, but no one from the imperialist country responded to me. So I began to work as a print reporter, following in my father's footsteps. Then I decided to fire off another round of letters, this time to a few American Christian universities. I remember quoting a Bible verse in my letter from Act 3, verse 6. "Silver or gold I do not have, and waited for someone to make me an offer. It had to be an offer with all things paid for, because no one in China had the money, that kind of money back then, to send anyone to school in America." One day, a miracle happened. I will never forget this day in 1988. I was sick, running a high fever in bed, and Father came home with much excitement. He shouted, "Look, I got something for you from America." Well, he didn't say that in English. I sat straight up in bed, shaking, trembling, trying to open the envelope, struggling. I was nervous. I was excited. I was weak. Well, it was a letter from the University of Mobile in Alabama, accepting me with a full ride. Hot tears came down on my face. I kept wiping them away because my vision was blurred. I was screaming, but nothing came out. Remember, I was still sick? And I was overwhelmed with sheer joy. And this is how God opened the first door for me. All I needed to do was walk through that door. I quit my job and said goodbye to my family and to start a new life on the other side of the planet, all by myself. But Southern hospitality was a good place for a Chinese girl to start a new life. After the initial cultural shocks and learning how to comprehend Southern English, I managed to pick up a major Southern drawl. I learned a few things, like truck, toothbrush. These are the things the kids taught me in school, but eventually I got worse than that. But that accent was crucial many years later for me to experience God's grace yet again. While at Mobile, I shared my childhood dream with my communications professor, Dr. Wolf, and he said to me, "Dottie, did you know the man who founded VOA lives here in Mobile?" A light bulb went off. That was the reason God put me in Mobile, not Harvard. Would you like to meet him, Dottie? So one day, the president of the university, Dr. Magnoli, drove me to meet Mr. Kenneth Giddens, and his wife, Mrs. Zelma Giddens, saw the potential in this young lady and took a liking to me. She told me to go to Washington, D.C. for a journalism program. I didn't have a choice. She bought me a ticket to come to Washington. So I flew up here with a grateful heart and knowing it was getting this much closer to VOA. Now, through that intern program I enrolled in, I cleverly applied for another intern opportunity at Voice of America's China branch. I got my foot in the door. When I entered the building of VOA for the first time, it was a surreal moment. Now, this place had dreamed of for years, and people had idolized the broadcasters. Now they became my mentors. They taught me how to broadcast live. They taught me how to splice tapes and edit programs. And they taught me how to differentiate a comma from a period on the air. Can you imagine, just for a moment, the feeling of broadcasting to 1 billion Chinese people? No, I know you can't, but that's okay. Now, my parents were my biggest fans. They listened to me just like I did as a kid listening to the Voice of America broadcast. So were the 1 billion Chinese people. I loved my job as an intern broadcaster, but that came to an end. But guess what? VOA offered me a job as a real broadcaster, and my childhood dream came true just like that. Wasn't that amazing? Have you heard of Rosetta Stone? Yeah, you have. Well, you could tell people that you've heard the story from the voice and voice coach of Rosetta Stone's Mandarin products. After VOA, I went on to do greater, better, and more exciting things, including working for the White House, traveling for and with President and Mrs. Clinton. And so I got to travel to a lot of places. But you know what? Before that, I was a spokesperson for a large corporation. A girl from China with a southern accent as a spokesperson? I don't think so. So I had to fix that accent. But reducing and modifying and neutralizing my accent is the single best thing I ever done for myself in my career. It changed the life of a kid from Hefei, China. It elevated me to a place I didn't know existed. It allowed me to do things and meet people all over the world and travel to places like Guam and Berlin and Bangladesh and Cologne, Germany for the G8 summit for the president and the first lady. It led me to a mission of helping others to break down cultural and communications barriers. And it has given me the greatest satisfaction seeing other immigrants in pursuing their dreams, just like I did as a young girl. If a 9-year-old from thousands of miles away who didn't speak a word of English could come to America to realize her dream, you could do anything in this great country. Anything, I promise. Thank you, folks. I have someone very special here, Mrs. Giddens, the woman who sent me here with an airplane ticket, who was responsible for me to be here in DC and to become the person I am. She's up there smiling and looking down. Her daughter Kay is here with us. I want to give Kay a round of applause. Thank you, Kay.